Okay, I'm not gonna lie, this topic is not one that I think is the most reputable, and mostly because of the source that it comes from. Now, there was an article that popped up on my timeline from NHLTradeRumors.me, which is why we're making this video. But I will say, in the article itself, there isn't a source as to where this information is coming from. It's just the article in isolation saying, yeah, this is a thing. So, today we're talking about the Ottawa Senators, and we're also talking about the Detroit Red Wings, and a player on the Nashville Predators that, according to this article, both of these teams are interested in. Let's head over on to NHLTradeRumors.me. The article is going to be linked in the description. This was published by Michael Del Rosa 3 days ago, Nashville Predators rumors. Two teams are linked to Tyson Barrie. Now, before we go out there and read what the article has to say, let's talk about the profile of the player in question. Tyson Barrie is a 31-year-old right-handed defenseman, 5'11", 196 pounds, from Victoria, BC. He expires at the end of next season, making $4.5 million a year. This has been a 3-year deal he was on since the Oilers re-signed him all those years ago, and there was a time when Tyson Barrie was seen as one of the premier offensive defensemen in the NHL. This was mostly backed up by his continuous 50 to 60 point seasons with the Colorado Avalanche. He was barely on the cusp of getting 60 2 times. Eventually, he made his way over to Toronto, where he wasn't really a good fit with that team, to be completely honest, and then he went over to Edmonton right after. In his first season with the Oilers, he had 48 points in 56 games played, which was kind of noteworthy because he was the top scoring defenseman out of all D-men in the entire shortened 56-game season. It actually was kind of historical, the season that he had, because even though he was the number one guy amongst all defenseman points, he didn't get a single Norris vote, which I think was the first time it had happened in multiple decades, if not ever, where the top guy was not nominated for the trophy in any respect. I don't know, it was some crazy stat like that, but eventually, after suiting up with the Oilers for 2 more seasons, he posted up 43 points in 61 games played before getting traded over to the Predators. It was in a trade with Mattias Ekholm as the grand prize for Edmonton, and to Ekholm's credit, he actually has been pretty good with the team. Tyson Barrie is a lot more of a purely offensive guy. Ekholm has a defensive side to him that makes him a lot more valuable, which is kind of why the Oilers decided to make the trade. Barrie in Nashville had 12 points in 24 games played, so if you do the math, he had a total of 55 points in 85 games played, because he played 61 with Edmonton and 24 with Nashville. That's crazy. Can we look at the NHL and see who else played over 82 games on the year? Yeah, okay, so Barrie had 85, Lars Eller had 84, so did Garnett Hathaway, Jack Johnson had 83, and that's it. All these other players had 82. Okay, that's really crazy. I didn't realize that heading into this video that the guy had over a full season's worth of game time, but he posted up a 50-point year. So good on him, he got points, he's a good point producer, power play quarterback from the back end, and this article on NHLTradeRumors.me talks about how the Predators acquired Barrie as one of the many pieces in the Ekholm trade. However, with the Predators looking to get younger, they are expected to start listening on offers for the offensive defenseman this summer. The 31-year-old is already starting to generate some interest, as the Senators and the Red Wings are linked to him. Now, this is kind of what I mean. There isn't really a source as to where this comes from. It just kind of says that this is the case here. The article then diverges into 2 parts. It talks about how the Sens made it known they want to not focus on the rebuild anymore. It's kind of over, and they want to improve the right side of their defensive group. Thus, it's not particularly surprising that Barrie is on their radar. He would give them another top 4 defenseman to work with, and be a power play specialist too. Meanwhile, for Detroit, because they had traded away Hronek to Vancouver, this opens the door for a guy like Barrie to be on their radar, especially since they're considering making a push for the playoffs. And so, realistically, just philosophically, it makes sense. The reasoning as to why these two teams would be interested in this player, and this player in particular, because Tyson Barrie can be, at his very best, a 40 to 50 power play 1 right-handed defenseman quarterback. If you wanted to have that 1-2 punch of Seider and Barrie as your power play guys, that makes sense. If you wanted to maybe try to load up and give Seider a break, it would make sense for Barrie to be here. Now, sure, this idea might go out there and be working a little bit backwards. If you tried to give Seider limited power play time and give more of it to Barrie, you could say, hey, that would actually reduce Seider's offensive output on the season, but it would give him more time to spend on the penalty kill and 5v5 without tiring himself out, both areas that Tyson Barrie isn't really too amazing at. I mean, he's a defenseman, an offensive guy, and that's how he makes his bread and butter. So, for the wings, it would make sense, philosophically, why Barrie would be a target. It's just whether or not Steve Yzerman would be willing to pull that type of a trigger. We've seen them make these trades where they're sending guys away, they're getting draft picks, they're getting capital in the draft. But when it comes to actually buying, that hasn't been a thing that Yzerman has done too much of this season. In fact, most of the guys that he ends up acquiring that are a little bit older and not necessarily young guys, they're all through free agency. He's gone out there and signed Ben Chiarot, he made the signings for Andrew Kopp and all these other players, taking what's there for free in the market instead of using up assets already in your organization to try and get those instead. The only trade we have seen recently where the Wings actually gave up a draft pick or something to get somebody that was not particularly young was the Ville Husso trade, and that doesn't even really count because Husso was young enough to justify rolling with him into the next few years. But all these other trades, you've got Hronek, you've got Bertuzzi, you've got, who else is here, Vrana? They're all seller-type moves, so I'm not too sure if now is the time for Yzerman to make that transition, or if it is, if Barrie is the guy that he goes for right away as the first target, you know? Meanwhile, for the Ottawa Senators, this is a team that was so close to making the playoffs, and honestly, if they just had a little bit more consistency at the start of the year, they probably would have found themselves a way to squeak in. If Cam Talbot hadn't gone through the ups and downs he had gone through, if Philip Gustafsson was on this team instead, and they were able to roll with him, if we assume Gustafsson on Ottawa would have been as good as Gustafsson with Minnesota, then hey, that Senators team is a playoff team already. They've got some good talent up front. They've got good young defensemen that are coming into the system here. Jake Sanderson is looking really good. You've got everybody else in the system too. Sure, while Thomas Chabot wasn't the healthiest this season, you still have other players that I think are worth it. Tyler Klevin, honestly, a pretty big surprise there too. But adding on a guy like Tyson Barrie to this team would add a really nice layer of offense to that blue line. We know how talented some of the guys up front could be. Tkachuk, Stützle, Giroux, DeBrincat, if you want to assume that guy's going to come back, which I don't think is going to happen. But yeah, let's just assume for now. There is some good enough talent here that if you wanted to try to put together a team that could just score a bunch of goals, then Tyson Barrie's a good add. It's just, of course, Tyson Barrie isn't really the best defensive guy, so you still would have to focus a little bit more on your goaltending and making sure that the rest of your defense can follow through with proper systems, but at the end of the day, it's an acquisition target that makes sense in my opinion when looking at it from Ottawa's point of view. So if you're a fan of either of these teams, Detroit or Ottawa, what are your opinions on this article citing Tyson Barrie as a potential target of yours? Do you think Barrie is an appropriate player to go after? Do you want to see your team try to make a trade for this guy? And if so, what is the price you would be willing to pay to get him? You gotta remember, he's signed on until the end of next season making 4.5 AAV. 4.5 million AAV, excuse me. So this is a player that isn't really too expensive with the dollar amount, but he isn't sticking around for too long of a time either. Meanwhile, you have the contract extension process you're going to have to go through. What is it worth trading for a guy who's only got 1 year left on his deal? And furthermore, depending on how he plays, you might have to go through a lengthy and contentious re-signing process, and the question is, would you be interested in dealing with that? So thoughts in the comment section below if you're a Red Wings or a Senators fan. Do you want Tyson Barrie for your team? If so, where do you think he fits in? Where do you think he excels the most? Who do you think he plays with? Do you want to pair him with a Tyler Klevin? Maybe try to get Jake Sanderson in on there because you want to balance out the offensive and the defensive capabilities? If you're a Red Wings guy, do you want to see Barrie with, let's say, Jake Wallman, for example? Break up that Seider pairing. See how he works away from Seider. Thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this Juraj 99. And bye.